The winter wind howled like a wounded beast across the Montana frontier, driving sheets of snow against the weathered walls of Elijah Rollins's ranch house. He dismounted his horse with the stiff movements of a man who'd spent 12 hours fighting through drifts that reached his stirrups, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. The cattle were secure in the lower pasture, but he'd lost 2 calves to the cold, a loss he could ill afford. His boots crunched through fresh powder as he led his exhausted mount toward the barn. The structure stood dark against the moonlit landscape, its doors secured against the storm he'd battled all day. Inside, the horses would need fresh hay and water, tasks that couldn't wait despite the bone-deep weariness that made each step an effort. He pulled open the heavy door, the hinges groaning their familiar protest. Moonlight spilled through the entrance, cutting a silver path across the hay-strewn floor. The familiar scents of horse and leather and dried grass wrapped around him like a worn blanket. His mare, Buttercup, nickered softly from her stall, and old Moses stamped a greeting from the far corner. Elijah had taken 3 steps inside when he stopped cold. There, in the pool of moonlight near the empty stall he used for storage, lay a figure, a woman, curled on her side atop a mound of loose hay, her dark hair spilling like ink across the golden straw. She wore a traveling cloak that had seen better days, torn at the hem and stained with mud. One arm was tucked beneath her head as a pillow, the other wrapped protectively around her middle. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip, though he didn't draw. Horse thieves and drifters weren't uncommon, but a woman alone, that was something else entirely. He approached slowly, his spurs singing softly with each step. The moonlight caught her face, and Elijah's world tilted on its axis. "Maggie," he breathed, the name torn from somewhere deep in his chest. Margaret Delaney. Even after 7 years, even with her face gaunt from hunger and marked by hardship, he knew her. The delicate line of her jaw, the way her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, the small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen from the oak tree behind her father's house. Every detail was burned into his memory like a brand. His knees hit the hay beside her before he realized he'd moved. Up close, he could see the purple shadow of a fading bruise along her jawline, the chapped state of her lips, the way her breathing came shallow and uneven. She was too thin, her cheekbones sharp beneath pale skin that had once glowed with health. "Maggie," he said again, louder this time, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She jerked awake with a gasp, scrambling backward until her back hit the stall wall. Wild eyes, those green eyes he'd drowned in 1,000 times, stared at him without recognition for a heartbeat. Then they widened. "Elijah!" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "It's me." He held his hands up, showing empty palms. "You're safe. You're at my ranch." She blinked, as if trying to determine whether she was dreaming. Her gaze darted around the barn, taking in the horses, the rafters, the open door with the snow swirling beyond. When she looked back at him, tears had gathered in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean. I was just so cold. And I saw the barn, and I thought—" She tried to stand, swayed, and would have fallen if Elijah hadn't caught her. "Easy now." He steadied her, alarmed at how light she felt in his arms. "When's the last time you ate?" She shook her head, either unable or unwilling to answer. This close, he could smell the road on her, dust and sweat and something else, something wild and frightened that made his chest tight. "Come on," he said, making the decision that would change everything. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." She pulled back weakly. I shouldn't be here. If someone sees—" "No one's going to see anything." He kept his voice calm, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles off, and this storm's got everyone hunkered down. You need food and warmth, and I'm not leaving you out here to freeze." For a moment, he thought she might run. He saw it in her eyes, the wild urge to bolt into the snow and darkness. Then her shoulders sagged, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured bellows. He half carried her to the house, her weight barely registering against his side. Inside, He settled her in the chair nearest the hearth and stirred the banked coals back to life. Orange flames licked at the fresh logs he added, casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly, and each detail was a knife to his gut. Her dress, once fine wool, was patched and travel-stained. Her hands, which had once played Mozart on her mother's piano, were red and raw, the nails broken. But it was her eyes that hurt him most. They held a wariness that hadn't been there before, the look of an animal that had learned to expect pain. He heated leftover stew from his supper, added more wood to the fire, and found a thick blanket to wrap around her shoulders. She accepted it all with a silence that was nothing like the girl who used to chatter like a magpie, telling him about books she'd read and dreams she'd had and plans they'd make together. When he set the bowl of stew before her, she stared at it as if she'd forgotten what to do with food. Then hunger took over, and she ate with careful, deliberate movements, as if afraid someone might snatch it away. Elijah busied himself making coffee, giving her space while keeping her in his peripheral vision. Questions burned in his throat. Where was her husband? The wealthy merchant her father had chosen? Why was she alone, injured, traveling in winter with nothing but the clothes on her back? What had driven her to his barn, of all places? But he held his tongue. 7 years was a long time. Whatever claim he'd once had on her, whatever promises they'd whispered in the summer darkness before her world and his were torn apart, those were dust now. She was a married woman, and he was just a rancher who'd learned to live with an empty space where his heart used to be. When she finished eating, she set the bowl aside with trembling hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll leave in the morning. I won't trouble you further." In this storm, he gestured toward the window, where snow beat against the glass like desperate fingers. "You wouldn't make it a mile. I've made it this far." "Have you?" He couldn't keep the edge from his voice, "because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you barely made it at all." She flinched, and he immediately regretted his harshness. This wasn't the place for his bitterness, not when she looked like a strong wind might shatter her. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was uncalled for. You'll stay until the storm passes and you're strong enough to travel. That's all there is to it." "Elijah, don't!" He stood abruptly, unable to bear the way she said his name, like it hurt her. "There's a room upstairs, second door on the right." Was going to be for... Well, it's empty. You can use it. There are some old clothes in the wardrobe that might fit. They're clean. He couldn't bring himself to say the room had been meant for his wife, back when he'd been fool enough to think he could marry someone else and forget. The engagement had lasted 6 months before both parties admitted what everyone else already knew, that Elijah Rollins was a man with a ghost where his heart should be. Maggie stood slowly, the blanket still clutched around her shoulders. "Why are you helping me?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. Let himself see not just the woman she'd become, but the girl she'd been, the one who'd snuck out to meet him by the creek, who'd laughed when he'd taught her to shoot, who'd pressed wildflowers between the pages of books and left them where he'd find them, the one who'd sobbed in his arms the night her father announced her engagement, promising she'd find a way back to him. "Because it's winter," he said finally, "and I don't turn anyone out in winter." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a lie that let them both keep their dignity, and sometimes that was all you had. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step seeming to cost her. He listened until he heard the door close, then sank into his chair and stared at the fire. Margaret Delaney was in his house. After 7 years of trying to forget her face, her laugh, the way she fit perfectly against him, she was here, sleeping under his roof, hurt, haunted, and running from something. But here, he poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and knocked it back, welcoming the burn. Tomorrow, he'd get answers. Tomorrow, he'd find out what had driven her to his door in the middle of a killing storm. Tomorrow, he'd remember that she belonged to another man, and he had no right to the feelings clawing at his chest. But tonight, Tonight he sat by the fire and remembered a summer when they'd been young and foolish enough to believe love could overcome anything. Before they'd learned that sometimes love wasn't enough. Before they'd learned that the world had teeth, and it wasn't afraid to use them. The wind howled outside, and somewhere above him, Margaret Delaney slept in the room he'd built for a future that had never come to pass. He'd thought he'd made peace with losing her. He was wrong. The morning came wrapped in white silence, the storm having blown itself out sometime before dawn. Elijah woke in his chair by the cold hearth, his neck stiff and his mouth tasting of ashen whiskey. For a moment, he wondered if he'd dreamed it all. Maggie in his barn, Maggie in his house, Maggie sleeping upstairs in the room he'd built for a life that never was. Then he heard movement overhead, careful footsteps on old floorboards, and reality settled back onto his shoulders like a yoke. He built up the fire and started coffee, then fried bacon and eggs, working by habit while his mind churned. Through the kitchen window, he could see the world transformed, snowdrifts reaching halfway up the fence posts, the barn roof wearing a thick white cap. Every sharp edge softened and every familiar landmark changed. She appeared in the doorway like a ghost made flesh, wearing the simple blue dress he'd known she'd find in the wardrobe. It had belonged to his mother, saved for reasons he'd never examined too closely. The fabric hung loose on Maggie's thin frame, but the color brought out the green in her eyes. "I should have asked before taking the dress," she said. "It's yours if you want it." He turned back to the stove, unable to look at her too long. "Breakfast is almost ready." They ate in silence, broken only by the pop of wood in the fire and the distant cry of a hawk. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to take food for granted. He noticed how she kept glancing at the door, the windows, as if calculating distances and escape routes. When the dishes were cleared and fresh coffee poured, he couldn't hold back any longer. "Where's your husband?" Her hands stilled around the coffee cup. For a long moment, she stared into its depths as if she might find answers there. "Dead," she said finally. 3 days ago." The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Elijah waited, having learned patience in the years since she'd left. "His name was Harrison Thornberry." She spoke his name like it tasted bitter. "He was 43 when we married, a successful merchant, just as father wanted. Owned 3 stores in Denver and interests in 2 mines. Maggie, he seemed kind at first." She continued as if he hadn't spoken, her voice taking on a distant quality. "Brought me flowers. Spoke sweetly. Father was so pleased. Mother said I'd learn to love him in time. That affection often grew after marriage." Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "They were wrong." Elijah's hands clenched around his own cup. He'd imagined many things over the years. Maggie in a fine house, draped in silk, hosting tea parties and raising children. He'd tortured himself with visions of her happy, of her forgetting him entirely. But this careful recitation of facts, this hollow-eyed woman who looked like she'd been hollowed out and filled with sorrow, this he hadn't imagined. "The bruises," he said quietly. She touched her jaw reflexively. "He was careful at first, nothing that would show, nothing that couldn't be explained by clumsiness. I was always so clumsy. You see, forever walking into doors and falling downstairs. Christ, Maggie, don't!" Her voice turned sharp. "Don't pity me. I survived. I got out. That's more than many women manage." "How did he die?" "Apoplexy." He was screaming at me about the roast being overdone when he clutched his chest and fell. The doctor said his heart gave out. She met his eyes then, and there was something fierce in her gaze. "I didn't call for the doctor right away. I waited, sat there and watched him gasp like a landed fish while I finished my tea." Elijah didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "I left that night," she continued. "Took what money I could find and what would fit in a carpet bag. I knew his brother would come, and he's cut from the same cloth. Worse, maybe, he'd claim everything, the stores, the house, me. Widow's inheritance doesn't mean much when there's a man willing to contest it." So you ran. So I ran. She stood, moving to the window. I took trains when I could afford them, stages when I couldn't, walked when I had to. I wasn't trying to come here. You know, I was heading for California. Maybe somewhere far enough that the Thornberry name meant nothing. But the storm caught me, and I remembered. What? You once said your ranch was 15 miles northwest of Clearwater, near Willow Creek. Funny, the things we remember. 7 years. And she'd held on to that detail. Elijah felt something crack in his chest. Some wall he'd built brick by careful brick. You can't go to California, he said. Not in winter, not alone. I can't stay here either. Why not? She turned from the window, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he saw a flash of the old Maggie, the one who'd never backed down from an argument. Because people talk, Elijah, because I'm a widow of 3 days, and you're an unmarried man, and this is a small town with small minds, because you built a life here, a reputation, and I won't be the one to tear it down. Maybe I don't care about any of that. You should, her voice gentled. You have to live here after I'm gone. After I'm gone, the words hit him like a physical blow. I loved you, he said suddenly, the words torn from him without his permission. God help me, Maggie, I loved you more than life itself. When your father sent you away, when I heard you'd married, he stopped, shook his head. It nearly killed me. And now you're here. And you're hurt, and you're talking about leaving again like it's nothing. It's not nothing. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. It's the hardest thing in the world, but I won't destroy your life. Elijah, I've done enough damage. What damage? What are you talking about? She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very young and very lost. Do you know why my father chose Harrison? Why the wedding was rushed? Elijah's stomach dropped. He thought of those stolen summer nights, of promises whispered against skin, of, I was with child, she said simply. Your child. The world stopped. The fire ceased its crackling, the wind its whisper. Everything narrowed to those 3 words and the grief in her eyes. Harrison knew it was part of the bargain. He wanted a young wife but couldn't afford to be particular. Father wanted the scandal contained, so they made their deal, and I was the currency. Maggie, his voice broke. I lost the baby 2 months after the wedding. Harrison was displeased, said I'd made him a fool, marrying him when I couldn't even carry a child properly. That was the first time he hit me. Elijah was on his feet without remembering standing, crossing to her in 2 strides. When he reached for her, she flinched backward, and that small motion nearly undid him. Please, she whispered. Please don't. If you touch me now, I'll shatter. And I've worked so hard to hold the pieces together. So he stood there, hands at his sides, watching her try to rebuild her walls brick by brick. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent. You'll stay, he said. It wasn't a question. Until spring. At least, until you're strong enough. Until I can bear to let you go again. He didn't say, Elijah, I'm not the boy I was 7 years ago. Maggie, I don't have any illusions about happy endings or love conquering all. But I'm also not letting you walk out into winter with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. You'll stay, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. She studied his face for a long moment. All right, she said finally. Until spring. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Spring was months away. A lot could happen in months, a lot could heal, or a lot could break beyond repair. As she moved past him toward the stairs, she paused. The baby, she said softly. I was going to name him Samuel, after your father. Then she was gone, leaving Elijah standing in the kitchen with a grief so fresh it might have happened yesterday. A child, their child, gone before he even knew it existed. He sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing them in together. 2 broken people in a broken world, trying to find a way forward when all the roads they'd planned to travel had been washed away. Somewhere above him, Maggie moved about the room he'd built for a future that had died before it could draw breath. And Elijah sat at his kitchen table and mourned for all the things that might have been. If only the world had been a little kinder. If only love had been enough. The days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Maggie insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and mending while Elijah tended to the ranch work. They moved around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the steps. Careful not to touch, careful not to linger too long in shared spaces. But the tension was there, humming beneath every ordinary moment like a river running under ice. It was a Tuesday morning when everything shifted. Elijah was fixing a broken harness in the barn when he heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats cutting through the still air. He set down his tools and moved to the door, squinting through the bright winter sun. 3 riders, still too far off to make out clearly, but moving with purpose down the snow-covered road. His gut tightened. Visitors were rare in winter, and 3 men riding together usually meant trouble of one kind or another. He walked back to the house, forcing his pace to remain casual. Maggie was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table, flour dusting her hands and a streak of it across her cheek. She looked up when he entered, and her smile died at his expression. "Someone's coming," he said quietly. 3 riders. The color drained from her face, her hands stilled on the dough. "How far?" 10 minutes, maybe 15. She was already untying her apron, her movements quick and efficient. "I'll hide in the root cellar." "Maggie, please." She gripped his arm, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him since that morning in the kitchen. "If it's anyone from Denver, if Harrison's brother sent them, I won't let them take you. You can't fight 3 men, Elijah, and if you kill someone over a runaway widow, they'll hang you." Her fingers dug into his sleeve. "Please, just let me hide until they're gone." Everything in him rebelled against it, hiding her like she was something shameful, letting her cower in the dark while he played ignorant. But the fear in her eyes was real, and he'd learned to trust a woman's instincts about danger. "Fine," he said, "but take this." He pulled his spare Colt from the high shelf, checked the cylinder, and pressed it into her hands. "You remember how to use it?" A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. "You taught me well." They went out the back door together, crossing to the root cellar built into the side of the hill. It was cold down there, but dry, with enough preserved food to last days if needed. He lit a lantern for her, checked the bar on the inside of the door. "I'll come for you when they're gone," he promised. She nodded, lamplight catching the determination in her eyes. "Be careful." He closed the door and heard the bar slide into place. By the time he made it back to the front porch, the riders were close enough to make out clearly. His shoulders relaxed fractionally when he recognized the lead man, Sheriff Tom Morrison from Clearwater. A decent man who'd been wearing the star for near 20 years, but the 2 men with him were strangers, and the way they sat their horses spoke of long, hard miles. "Tom," Elijah called out in greeting. "Hell of a day for a ride." The sheriff swung down from his horse, stomping his feet to get feeling back. "That it is. Elijah, mind if we come in? Coffee would be a blessing." "Of course." Elijah led them inside, noting how the stranger's eyes cataloged everything. The 2 plates drying by the sink, the bread dough rising under a cloth, the general signs of a woman's presence that he hadn't thought to hide. While he poured coffee, Morrison made introductions. "This here's Mr. August Thornberry from Denver, and his associate, Mr. Phelps." Elijah kept his face neutral as he handed out cups. August Thornberry had the same hard mouth as his brother must have had, the same calculating eyes. Phelps looked like what he probably was, hired muscle dressed up in a town suit. "We're looking for a woman," Thornberry said without preamble. "My sister-in-law. She's been missing for near a week now, and we're worried sick about her." "That's so." Elijah sipped his coffee slowly. "What makes you think she'd come this way?" "We've been checking all the roads out of Denver. Someone matching her description took a stage to Fairview, then bought a horse there. Trail's been hard to follow with the snow, but..." Thornberry shrugged. "A woman alone draws attention. I imagine so. Elijah kept his voice mild. What's she look like, this sister-in-law of yours? Morrison pulled out a piece of paper. Mrs. Margaret Thornberry, 25 years old, dark hair, green eyes, about this tall. He held his hand at shoulder height. Pretty woman, they say. Well-bred? Can't say I've seen anyone like that. The lie came smooth as good whiskey. But then, I don't get to town much in winter. Phelps spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. Mind if we look around? Check your barn, maybe? Elijah set down his cup very carefully. I do mind. Actually, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Thornberry's eyes narrowed. Now why would that be? Mr. Rollins. Because this is my land, and your guest's here only as long as I say so. He met Thornberry's stare steadily. Because I don't take kindly to being called a liar in my own home. And because Tom here knows I've got no reason to hide runaway women. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Now, Elijah, no one's calling you anything, Mr. Thornberry's just worried about his family. Is he? Elijah turned to Thornberry. Tell me, how long were you married to this woman's sister? Thornberry blinked at the unexpected question. I wasn't. My brother Harrison was her husband. Was? He passed last week, apoplexy. And you're hunting his widow down. Why, exactly? To offer condolences? Thornberry's jaw tightened. There are matters of the estate to discuss, papers to sign. She left before the body was cold, Elijah suggested. Can't imagine why a grieving widow would do such a thing. Elijah! Morrison's voice carried a warning. I'm just trying to understand. Tom, man's brother dies, and instead of mourning, he's riding through blizzards chasing the widow. Seems peculiar is all. Phelps stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We don't need to explain ourselves to you, rancher. Elijah rose too, smooth and easy. His hand didn't move toward his gun, but Phelps tracked the potential of movement anyway. Smart man. No, Elijah agreed. You don't, just like I don't need to let you search my property without cause. Tom, you know the law well as I do. They want to look around. They can get a warrant from Judge Harper. Otherwise, he let the word hang. Morrison sighed, looking every one of his 50 years. He's right, Mr. Thornberry. Without evidence, she's here. I can't force the issue. Thornberry's face flushed dark. This is a mistake. Rollins, that woman is my responsibility now. My brother's widow. What's mine by right? People aren't property, Elijah said softly. Leastways, not anymore. War settled that question. The silence stretched dangerous and tight. Then Morrison stood, setting his empty cup on the table. Thank you for the coffee. Elijah, we'll be on our way. He gave Thornberry a look that brooked no argument. Gentlemen, Elijah walked them to the door. Standing on the porch as they mounted up, Thornberry leaned down from his saddle. I'll be back, he said quietly. With or without paper. That woman belongs to me now, and I'll have what's mine. Try it, Elijah replied just as quiet. See what happens. They locked eyes for a long moment before Thornberry wheeled his horse around. Elijah watched until they were specks in the distance, then waited another 10 minutes to be sure. Maggie was sitting on a crate in the cellar, the colt across her lap. She looked up when he opened the door, and he saw she'd been crying. They're gone, he said. She stood slowly, as if her bones hurt. August found me. He found this ranch. He didn't find you. It's the same thing. She climbed the steps, pausing when they were eye level. You lied for me. I told the truth. Haven't seen any woman matching that description. The woman in my house is someone else entirely. Elijah! No. He stepped back to let her pass. You're not Margaret Thornberry. Never were. Far as I'm concerned. That woman's gone, and good riddance to her. Back in the kitchen, she stood hugging herself by the stove. He'll be back. You know he will. Let him come. You don't understand. The Thornberry family has money, influence, If August decides he wants something, I've got something he doesn't. Elijah moved to the window, checking the road again. I've got right on my side, and I've got neighbors who remember what it's like when powerful men think they can take whatever they want. Right doesn't stop bullets. No, he agreed. But it helps with the aim. She laughed, short and bitter. You haven't changed. Still thinking you can take on the world. Not the world. He turned back to her. Just whatever comes down that road. The bread dough had overrisen while she was hiding, but she punched it down and shaped it into loaves with practiced hands. He watched her work, remembering another kitchen, another life, when she'd helped his mother make Sunday dinner and he'd stolen kisses while the bread baked. I need to leave, she said without looking up. Tonight, if possible. Before what? Before they come back with more men? Before the law gets involved? He crossed to her, stopping just out of reach. You think running more will solve this? It's solved it so far. Has it? You're exhausted, half-starved, jumping at shadows. That's not freedom. Maggie, that's just another kind of prison. Her hand stilled on the dough. A tear splashed onto the flour-dusted board. I'm so tired, she whispered. So tired of running, of being afraid, of... Her voice broke. This time, when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. She fell against him like she'd been waiting to fall, her face pressed to his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her carefully, as if she might break, while she cried out 7 years of fear and pain and loss. When the storm passed, she pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. I can't lose you again, she said. Not to August, not to bullets, not to anything. I'd rather run forever than watch you die for me. And I'd rather fight than watch you disappear again. He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away a lingering tear. We're quite a pair, aren't we? The worst, she agreed. And for the first time since she'd arrived, she almost smiled. That night, he moved his bedroll downstairs to sleep by the door. Not because he didn't trust her to stay, though that was part of it, but because he meant to be between her and whatever came in the night. She argued, of course, said it was foolish, that he needed proper rest, that she could take care of herself. He ignored every word and settled in with his rifle close at hand. Somewhere past midnight, he heard her footsteps on the stairs. She appeared like a ghost in her white nightgown, another remnant from the trunk upstairs. Can't sleep, he asked. Every time I close my eyes, I see August's face. She sat on the bottom step, arms wrapped around her knees. He looked just like Harrison when he was angry. He's not Harrison. No, he might be worse. Harrison wanted to own me. August wants to own what I represent, the money, the status, the chance to hurt someone who can't fight back. She rested her chin on her knees. I've become quite good at reading cruel men. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling low in the hearth. Finally, she spoke again. Do you ever think about what might have been if my father hadn't... Every day, he said simply. But thinking about it doesn't change it. No. She stood, paused at the foot of the stairs. Thank you, for today, for everything. Maggie. But she was already climbing the stairs, leaving him alone with his gun and his ghosts and the certain knowledge that tomorrow would bring a reckoning of one kind or another. The fever came on suddenly 3 days later. Elijah found Maggie collapsed by the chicken coop, her face flushed and burning despite the bitter morning cold. She'd gone out to gather eggs and hadn't come back, and something, instinct, perhaps, or the bone-deep awareness of her he'd never lost, had driven him to check. Just tired, she mumbled as he lifted her, her head lolling against his shoulder. So tired. He carried her to the house, her weight nothing in his arms, fear making his hands shake as he settled her in the bed upstairs. Her skin burned like a stove, and when she coughed, he heard the rattle deep in her chest. The nearest doctor was in Clearwater, 15 miles through snow that would take hours to navigate. By the time he returned, if he could even convince Doc Hartley to come, it might be too late. So he did what he could, drew water from the well, heated it, bathed her face and hands with cool cloths, spooned willow bark tea between her cracked lips when she could swallow, kept the fire burning and the room warm but not stifling. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost in fever dreams. She called for her mother, long dead. She begged Harrison not to hit her. She cried for the baby she'd lost, reaching for something that wasn't there. And she called for him. "Elijah," she whispered, her hands searching across the quilts. "Don't leave. Please don't leave." "I'm here," he said, catching her hand in both of his. "I'm right here, Maggie. I'm not going anywhere." The second night was the worst. Her fever spiked so high he could feel the heat radiating off her from a foot away. She thrashed in the bed, fighting invisible demons, and when he tried to hold her still, she screamed, a sound that tore through him like barbed wire. He'd seen men die from fever in the war, watched them burn up from the inside while surgeons stood helpless. He knew the signs, knew that morning would likely find her still and cold if the fever didn't break soon. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion and fear. "Don't you dare leave me again, Margaret Delaney, not like this, not when I just got you back." Somewhere in the darkest part of the night, she went quiet, too quiet. He pressed his ear to her chest, relief flooding through him when he heard her heartbeat, faint but steady. Her breathing had eased, the terrible rattle fading. When he touched her forehead, it was damp with sweat. The fever had broken. He stayed with her through the rest of the night, changing the sweat-soaked sheets, keeping her warm as chills replaced the burning. When dawn painted the windows pink and gold, she opened her eyes, truly opened them, clear and aware. "Elijah?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillows. "What happened?" "You've been sick, fever, 3 days." Her eyes widened. 3 days? But the animals are fine. Everything's fine." He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, the gesture so natural he didn't think about it until it was done. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses." She caught his hand as he started to pull away. "You stayed with me. Where else would I be?" She studied his face, taking in the stubble, the shadows under his eyes, the clothes he'd been wearing for days. "You look terrible." "Well, you look beautiful," he said without thinking, then felt heat rise in his own face. But she smiled, the first real smile he'd seen since she'd come back into his life. "Liar. Never about that." The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then she shifted, wincing again, and he remembered she was still weak, still recovering. "You need to eat," he said, standing. "I'll make some broth." "Elijah, wait." When he turned back, she was watching him with those green eyes that had haunted his dreams for 7 years. "In the fever, did I say anything?" He thought of her cries, her pleas, the broken way she'd begged for mercy from a dead man. Nothing that matters, but she knew him too well, even after all this time. "What did I say?" He sat back down on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "You talked about the baby, about Harrison." Her face closed off, the brief openness disappearing like sun behind clouds. "I'm sorry you had to hear that." "Don't." He caught her chin gently, turning her face back to his. "Don't apologize for surviving. Don't apologize for the pain he caused you. I'm not the girl you remember, Elijah. I'm not innocent or untouched or... I don't want the girl I remember." The words came out fierce, certain. "I want the woman in front of me, the one who survived hell and came out the other side, the one who's so strong it scares her." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "How can you say that? How can you even look at me, knowing..." "Knowing what? That you were hurt by someone who should have protected you? That you lost our child because of his cruelty?" His voice broke on the last words. "That doesn't make me think less of you, Maggie. It makes me want to dig him up and kill him again." She laughed through her tears, a watery sound. "He's beyond hurting now. Good. Elijah." But whatever she was going to say was lost as she began coughing, harsh and painful. He helped her sit up, rubbed her back until the spasm passed. "Rest," he said. "We can talk when you're stronger." She nodded, already sinking back into the pillows. But as he reached the door, she called his name again. "The things I said about you not leaving. In the fever, I meant them," he finished quietly. "I know. And I meant it when I said I wasn't going anywhere." He went downstairs before she could respond, needing distance to rebuild his composure. The kitchen was cold, the fire long dead, and he welcomed the mundane task of rebuilding it. His hands knew this work, could do it without thinking, leaving his mind free to process the last 3 days. She'd almost died. The thought hit him like a physical blow, making him brace his hands against the table. He'd come so close to losing her again, this time forever, and somewhere between bathing her fevered face and listening to her breathe, he'd admitted the truth to himself. He still loved her. Not the memory of her, not the ghost he'd carried for 7 years, but the woman upstairs, damaged, strong, beautiful in her imperfection. He loved her, and he had no idea what to do about it. The broth was simple, chicken stock he'd made days ago, heated with some herbs from the garden. He added fresh bread, soft enough for her weakened state, and carried it upstairs on a tray. She was awake, propped against the pillows, staring out the window at the snow-covered fields. "It's beautiful here," she said without looking at him. "Peaceful. It has its moments." He set the tray across her lap, pleased when she immediately reached for the spoon. "Eat slow. Your stomach won't thank you if you rush." She obeyed, taking small sips, and he busied himself tidying the already neat room. When she'd finished half the bowl, she set the spoon down. "I remember more than just the fever," she said quietly. "I remember you talking to me, telling me not to leave." He stilled, his back to her. "You were dying. I said what I needed to say." "Did you mean it?" He turned then, meeting her gaze. "Every word." She looked down at her hands, twisted in the quilt. "I'm not good for you, Elijah. I bring trouble, danger. You saw that with August. I've faced worse than August Thornberry, but you shouldn't have to. You've built something good here. A life, a reputation, a future. I won't be the one to destroy that." He crossed to the bed in 2 strides, sat down hard enough to make the frame creak. "Listen to me, Margaret Delaney. You keep talking about what's good for me, what I should or shouldn't have to face. Did you ever think maybe that's my choice to make? But no." He took her hands, careful of their fragility but firm in his grip. "My turn to talk? You think you're protecting me by pushing me away? You're not. You're just giving both of us what we think we deserve. Loneliness, pain, a life half lived because we're too damn scared to reach for more." "I'm not scared," she protested. "No? Then why are you already planning to leave? Why are you so sure you'll bring me nothing but trouble?" He leaned closer. "You're not scared of August or the law or what people might say. You're scared of being happy. You're scared that if you let yourself have this, it'll get taken away again." She jerked her hands free, anger flashing in her eyes. "Of course I'm scared. Everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. My parents, my baby, even you. I'm right here. For now." The words exploded out of her. "Until August comes back with more men. Until someone decides a fallen woman doesn't deserve a second chance. Until—" He kissed her, not gently, not carefully, but with 7 years of longing and fear and frustrated love behind it. For a moment she went rigid, then melted against him, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she was crying again. "This is why I can't stay," she whispered. "Because I want this too much. Because I'd rather die than lose you again, and I can't survive that. Elijah, I'm not strong enough. Then we won't lose each other." He rested his forehead against hers. "Simple as that. Nothing's ever that simple." "No," he agreed. "But maybe it doesn't have to be complicated either. Maybe it can just be this, you and me, figuring it out as we go." She closed her eyes, and he could see the war playing out across her face. Hope against fear. Want against wisdom. When she opened them again, something had shifted. "All right," she said softly. "All right." It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a declaration of love or a guarantee against future pain, but it was enough. For now. It was enough. He helped her finish the broth, then settled her back against the pillows. Sleep, real sleep this time, not fever dreams. "Will you stay?" The question was small, vulnerable. "Always," he said, and meant it. He sat in the chair by the window, watching the snow fall and listening to her breathe. Steady now. Easy. Outside, the world was white and clean. All the rough edges softened, all the scars hidden. But scars hidden weren't scars healed. And come spring, when the snow melted, all those rough edges would show again. He'd face them when they came. They both would. For now, though, there was this, a warm room, a healing woman, and the promise of something that might, if they were very careful and very brave, bloom into the future they'd once dreamed of. It was enough. It was everything. The thaw came early that year. February sunshine melting the snow into muddy rivers that made the roads passable again. With it came the inevitable. Word spreading through Clearwater like wildfire that Elijah Rollins had a woman staying at his ranch. He heard the whispers when he went to town for supplies, saw the looks, some curious, some disapproving. Mrs. Henderson at the general store asked after his house guest, with eyebrows raised so high they nearly touched her hairline. Old Pete at the saloon wanted to know if Elijah was finally thinking of settling down. "About time," Pete had said, polishing a glass with practiced movements. Man wasn't meant to live alone. But not everyone was so accepting. Reverend Matthias pulled him aside after he'd loaded his wagon. Thin face pinched with concern. "There's talk, Elijah, unsavory talk about the woman at your place." "There's always talk," Elijah replied evenly. "Folks got nothing better to do in winter. This is different. That man from Denver, Thornberry, he's been spreading word that she's his brother's widow, that she ran off with money that weren't hers, that she's—" The Reverend lowered his voice. "Not a moral woman." Elijah's hands tightened on the wagon reins, but he kept his voice calm. "Since when do we take the word of strangers over our own judgment, Reverend? Since that stranger's offering a reward for information about her whereabouts. $50. Elijah, that's enough to turn heads." It was enough to buy seed for spring planting, enough to pay off debts, enough to make desperate people do desperate things. Elijah felt the noose tightening. When he got back to the ranch, Maggie was in the garden plot, clearing away dead growth to prepare for spring planting. She'd regained her strength over the past weeks, the hollow places filling in, color returning to her cheeks. Watching her work, humming softly to herself, he could almost pretend they were just another couple preparing for another season. "How was town?" she asked without looking up. He considered lying, but they'd promised each other honesty. "Thornberry's been busy. He's put a price on information about you." Her hands stilled on the rake. "How much?" $50. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that all? Harrison paid more than that for his hunting dogs." "Maggie, I should go." She resumed raking with fierce determination. "Tonight, before what?" He jumped down from the wagon, crossing to her in quick strides. "Before we face this together like we promised? Before we see it through? Before someone decides $50 is worth more than your reputation?" She turned to face him, and he saw she'd already been crying. "Don't you understand? This changes everything. People will come looking now. Good people, desperate people who need that money. Let them come. You can't fight the whole town. Elijah—" "I won't have to." He took the rake from her hands, set it aside. "Most folks here are decent. They remember what it's like to start over, to need a second chance. And the ones who aren't—" He shrugged. "I've faced worse odds." That night, she was quiet through dinner, pushing food around her plate more than eating. When the dishes were done and the fire banked, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching him. "I've made my decision. she said quietly. His heart stopped. Maggie, I'm staying. The words hung between them like a challenge. He crossed to her slowly, afraid to spook her. You're sure? No, she smiled sadly. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of running forever, of always wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to stay. He pulled her into his arms then, and she came willingly, pressing her face against his chest. They stood there in the doorway between rooms, between choices, holding on like they might be torn apart at any moment. There's something else, she murmured against his shirt. Something I need to tell you. About the money. He pulled back to look at her. What money? The money Harrison kept in his study. Almost $3,000. She met his eyes steadily. I took it, all of it. It's sewn into the lining of my cloak. $3,000. More than most men saw in 5 years of hard work. Enough to buy land, cattle, a future. It's mine by rights, she continued quickly. My inheritance from my parents, my dowry. He took it all when we married, said a wife's property belonged to her husband, but I figured a widow's property belonged to her. That why Thornberry wants you back so bad? Partly, but mostly because he can't stand the thought of someone defying him. Harrison was the same way. Her jaw set stubbornly. I won't give it back. I earned every penny with blood and bruises. I'm not asking you to. She searched his face. You don't care about the money? I care about you being safe. I care about you being free. The money's just paper. Paper that could buy a lot of cattle. Fix up this ranch. Give us... She stopped, color flooding her cheeks. Give us what? He asked softly. Nothing. I'm being presumptuous. Maggie. He caught her chin, tilted her face up. What? A future, she whispered. It could give us a future. The word hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. He'd been careful not to push, not to assume. They'd been living in a careful present, neither acknowledging the growing intimacy between them nor naming what they were building. Is that what you want? He asked. A future here, with me? She pulled away, pacing to the window. I don't know what I want. I know I'm tired of being afraid. I know I sleep better when you're near. I know that when I think about leaving, I can't breathe. She turned back to him. Is that enough? It's more than enough. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sheriff Morrison again, but this time with Judge Harper and, surprisingly, Mayor Whitman. Elijah met them on the porch, Maggie standing behind him in the doorway. Morning, Tom, he said evenly. Judge, Mayor. What brings you all out here? Judge Harper, a stern man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, spoke first. We need to talk about Mrs. Thornberry. Don't know anyone by that name, Elijah said. The woman standing behind you, Morrison said tiredly. Come on, Elijah. The whole town knows she's here. The whole town knows I have a guest. Her name's Margaret Delaney, who just happens to match the description of a missing widow from Denver. Judge Harper said dryly. Don't play games. Son, this is serious. Mayor Whitman, younger than the other two and generally sympathetic to Elijah, stepped forward. We're not here to cause trouble. Elijah, but Thornberry's making noise about bringing in federal marshals, claiming she crossed state lines with stolen property. We need to sort this out before it gets that far. Maggie stepped out onto the porch then, chin high despite the tremor in her hands. What do you want to know? Judge Harper studied her with those sharp eyes. Are you Margaret Thornberry, formerly Margaret Delaney? I was married to Harrison Thornberry, yes, but I've never been Margaret Thornberry. I've always been Margaret Delaney. You left Denver shortly after your husband's death. I did. Taking property that belonged to the estate. Taking property that belonged to me. Her voice grew stronger. My dowry, my inheritance, money that became his by law when we married, but was mine by right. Can you prove this? Maggie glanced at Elijah, then squared her shoulders. I have letters from my father detailing the dowry. Harrison kept them in his study. I took those too. And where are these letters? Safe. The judge's mouth quirked slightly. I see. And what of August Thornberry's claim that you were responsible for his brother's death? Harrison died of apoplexy, Maggie said steadily. Doctor, Pemberton confirmed it. He'd been having pains for months but refused to see a physician. Said doctors were charlatans. But you were alone with him when he died. Yes. And you didn't call for help immediately. A pause. Then, no. The silence stretched. Elijah tensed, ready to intervene, but Judge Harper held up a hand. Miss Delaney. I've been a judge for 20 years. I've seen women come before me with bruises they claim came from falling downstairs, broken bones from being clumsy, black eyes from walking into doors. His voice gentled slightly. Were you one of those clumsy women? Maggie's composure cracked slightly. Yes. And when your husband collapsed, were you afraid? Terrified? Of him or for him? She met the judge's eyes directly. Both, but mostly I was afraid he would recover, that he would survive and make me pay for seeing him weak. Her voice dropped to a whisper. So I finished my tea first, counted to 100, then I called for help. God in heaven, Mayor Whitman muttered. Judge Harper removed his spectacles, cleaned them slowly. When he put them back on, his expression was unreadable. Sheriff Morrison, have you received any formal charges against Miss Delaney? No, sir. Just a lot of talk from Thornberry about stolen property and suspicious circumstances. And has anyone produced evidence that the money she took wasn't rightfully hers? No, sir. The judge nodded. Then I see no legal reason to pursue this matter. He looked at Maggie again. However, I would suggest you have those letters ready should Thornberry pursue formal charges. And perhaps, he glanced at Elijah, perhaps you might consider making your situation here more official. Elijah felt Maggie stiffen beside him. What do you mean? I mean that a woman under the protection of a husband has certain legal rights that a guest does not. The judge put on his hat. Just something to consider. Good day. They watched the three men ride away. When they were out of sight, Maggie sank onto the porch step, shaking. He knows I let Harrison die. He knows you survived, Elijah corrected, sitting beside her. There's a difference. Is there, in the eyes of the law, of God? I don't presume to speak for God, but the law. Seems the law understands sometimes there's justice outside a courtroom. She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. What the judge said, she began, then stopped. About making things official? Yes. What about it? She pulled back to look at him. Elijah Rollins, is that your idea of a proposal? No, he said seriously. When I propose, you'll know it. When? When you're ready. When you're choosing me because you want to, not because you need protection or because it's convenient. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. When you can say yes without looking over your shoulder. She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. What if I'm never ready? What if I'm always looking over my shoulder? Then I'll keep standing beside you, watching the road ahead. That night, she came to his room. He woke to find her standing in the doorway, silhouetted by moonlight, wearing the white nightgown that made her look like a ghost. Maggie, I don't want to be afraid anymore, she said softly. I don't want to wait for someday. I've lost so much time already. He sat up, sheet pooling at his waist. What are you saying? She crossed to the bed, sat on the edge, her hand finding his in the darkness. I'm saying yes. I haven't asked yet. Then ask. His heart hammered against his ribs. Margaret Delaney, will you? She kissed him before he could finish, and the question got lost in the sweetness of her mouth, the warmth of her body as she pressed against him. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she was smiling through tears. Yes, she said again. Yes to all of it. To you, to this life, to whatever comes. You're sure? I'm sure I love you. I'm sure I want to stop running. I'm sure that if August Thornberry wants to take me from here, he'll have to go through you. And I've seen you shoot. She traced his jaw with gentle fingers. Is that enough? More than enough. He echoed his own words back to her. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Clearwater, with Sheriff Morrison and Mayor Whitman as witnesses. Half the town came to watch, drawn by curiosity and scandal. Reverend Matthias performed the ceremony with obvious reluctance, but he performed it. Maggie wore her mother's wedding dress, retrieved from the bottom of her carpet bag where she'd hidden it beneath false lining. It was yellow with age and too loose in places, but when Elijah saw her walking toward him, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Do you, Elijah James Rollins, take this woman?" "I do," he said before the Reverend could finish, earning a ripple of laughter from the congregation. When it came time to kiss his bride, he kept it brief, mindful of their audience. But the promise in her eyes said there would be time later for the kind of kisses they both wanted. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, he noticed August Thornberry standing at the back of the church, face dark with fury. Their eyes met over the heads of the townspeople, and Elijah smiled. A hard, challenging smile that said clearer than words, "She's under my protection now." Thornberry left without speaking to anyone, and if his departure felt more like a tactical retreat than a surrender. Elijah tried not to think about it. This was their day, their victory. That night, in their bedroom now. Not just his. Maggie stood by the window in her nightgown, brushing her hair. "No regrets?" he asked, coming up behind her. She leaned back against him, smiling at their reflection in the dark glass. "None? You?" "Only that it took 7 years to get here. Maybe we needed those 7 years. Maybe we had to break apart to come back together stronger." "Maybe," he agreed, turning her in his arms. "Or maybe we're just too stubborn for our own good." "That too." She laughed. And then he was kissing her. And there was no more need for words. Outside, the March wind howled, bringing with it the promise of spring and storms and new growth. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. And for now, that was enough. More than enough. Everything. The morning after their wedding dawned clear and cold, frost painting the windows with delicate patterns. Elijah woke first, still half convinced he'd dreamed it all. The ceremony, the townsfolk bearing witness, Maggie in his bed with her dark hair spread across his pillow like spilled ink. But she was there, real and warm, and his. One hand curled against his chest as if to keep him close even in sleep. He watched her breathe, memorizing the moment, until her eyes fluttered open. "Good morning, Mrs. Rollins," he murmured. A smile curved her lips. "Say it again. Mrs. Rollins. I don't think I'll ever tire of hearing that." She stretched, then winced slightly. "Though I might tire of other things if you don't let me rest occasionally." He laughed, pulling her closer. "Complaining already? We've only been married 12 hours. 14, she corrected. Not that I was counting. They might have stayed there all day, wrapped in each other in the newness of belonging. But the ranch demanded attention. Cattle needed feeding, horses needed tending, and life didn't pause for honeymoons. It was while Elijah was in the barn, mucking stalls and planning which mares to breed come spring, that he heard the riders approaching. His hand went automatically to his gun as he moved to the door. 4 men this time. August Thornberry led them, his black coat making him look like a carrion bird against the white landscape. Beside him rode Phelps and 2 others, hard men with harder faces, the kind money could buy in any frontier town. Elijah stepped into the yard, rifle held casual but ready. "Thornberry, thought you might have headed back to Denver by now. Not without what's mine." Thornberry dismounted, his men following suit. "Heard congratulations are in order. You married my sister-in-law yesterday. I married Margaret Delaney yesterday. Don't know any sister-in-law of yours." Thornberry's jaw tightened. "Clever. You think a wedding ring changes the facts? She's a thief and possibly a murderess, and I'll see justice done." "Whose justice? Yours?" Elijah shifted slightly, putting himself between the men in the house. "Way I hear it, justice would be letting her keep what was hers to begin with. What was hers became my brother's when they married. What was his becomes mine now he's dead. That's the law. Maybe. But possession is 9/10 of that law. And right now she possesses it. You want to contest that? Take it to court. Judge Harper seemed mighty understanding of the situation. One of the hired men, a scarred brute with dead eyes, spoke up. Mr. Thornberry ain't much for courts. That's so? Elijah's voice went soft. Dangerous. Then maybe Mr. Thornberry should reconsider his approach. The kitchen door opened, and Maggie stepped onto the porch. She dressed hurriedly but held herself like a queen, chin high and shoulders back. August, she said coolly. Still playing the grieving brother, I see. Margaret? Thornberry's eyes glittered with malice. Still playing the innocent widow? I never played at anything. That was Harrison's domain, playing the devoted husband in public while showing his true nature in private. She descended the steps slowly, moving to stand beside Elijah. But you knew that, didn't you? You saw the bruises, heard the accidents, did nothing. A husband has rights. To beat his wife, to treat her like property. Maggie's voice rose. To kill the child she carried because he was angry about a business deal. The words hung in the cold air like icicles, sharp and cutting. Even Thornberry's men shifted uncomfortably. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything. Harrison is dead, and I'm free. That's all that matters. She lifted her chin higher. I'm Mrs. Elijah Rollins now, and this is my land you're trespassing on. Thornberry's face flushed dark red. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? You'll what? Elijah cut in, his voice deadly quiet. Threaten my wife, on my land, in front of witnesses. The tension stretched taut as fence wire. Phelps's hand drifted toward his gun, but stopped when Elijah shifted the rifle meaningfully. Here's what's going to happen. Elijah continued. You're going to get on your horse and ride away. You're going to go back to Denver and forget you ever had a sister-in-law? You're going to leave us in peace. Or what? Thornberry sneered. You'll shoot us down? Murder us in cold blood? That's your solution? No. I'll defend what's mine. There's a difference. Elijah's eyes never left Thornberry's. But if you come back here, if you threaten her again, if I even hear you've been asking about her in town, then we'll settle this the way men settle things out here. You understand me? For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Thornberry smiled, an ugly twist of lips that held no humor. Oh, I understand perfectly. You've made your choice, Rollins. Now you get to live with the consequences. He mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over. It is for today. Elijah replied evenly. They watched the four men ride away, dust settling in their wake like disturbed ghosts. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Maggie sag against him. He'll be back, she said quietly. Maybe, maybe not. Men like Thornberry are cowards at heart. They prefer easy targets. I'm sorry. I've brought this to your door. Our door, he corrected firmly. And you brought nothing. He brought it, with his greed and his pride. He set the rifle aside, pulled her into his arms. You're my wife now. Maggie, that means your fights are my fights. For better or worse. Remember? I remember. She buried her face against his chest. I just wish our worst didn't come with guns. That evening, as they sat by the fire. Maggie was unusually quiet. She had been jumpy since the confrontation, starting at every sound, checking the windows repeatedly. Talk to me, Elijah said finally. What's going on in that head of yours? She set aside her mending, fingers twisting in her lap. I keep thinking about what August said, about choices and consequences. She looked up at him. What if he's right? What if I've doomed us both? You haven't doomed anything. But, no. He moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. Listen to me. I made my choice 7 years ago. The night you left, I chose to wait for you, even when I didn't know if you'd ever come back. I chose to build this life, this ranch, always with a space for you in it. And when you showed up in my barn, half frozen and running scared, I chose you again. Not because you needed saving, not because it was convenient, but because you're the only choice I've ever wanted to make." Tears ran down her cheeks. "I don't deserve— Don't—" He cupped her face gently. "Don't tell me what you deserve. You deserve love and safety and happiness. You deserve a life free from fear, and I'll be damned if I let August Thornberry or anyone else take that from you." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and he responded in kind, pouring all his frustration and fear and love into the contact. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she managed a watery smile. "I love you," she said simply. "I should have said it yesterday, at the church. Should have said it 7 years ago when it might have made a difference. But I'm saying it now. I love you. Elijah Rollins, whatever comes, I need you to know that." "I know," he said softly. "I've always known, just like you've always known I love you." They made love then, slow and tender, a reaffirmation of vows made before God and man. Afterward, they lay tangled together, listening to the wind and the settling of the house. "I want to do something with the money," Maggie said suddenly. "What kind of something?" "Something good, something that makes it clean." She propped herself on an elbow, looking down at him. "What if we used it to improve the ranch, buy more cattle, fix up the barn, maybe add another room or two for children?" His heart stuttered. "Children? Someday, if we're blessed." She traced patterns on his chest, not meeting his eyes. "Would you want that? After everything?" "Yes." The word came out rough with emotion. "God, yes, 12 of them if you want." She laughed. "Let's start with one and see how we manage." "Deal." But even as they made plans, talking softly about the future they'd build together, Elijah couldn't shake the feeling that Thornberry's threat hung over them like a storm cloud. Men like that didn't give up easily, didn't accept defeat with grace. He was right to worry. 3 nights later, Elijah woke to the smell of smoke. "Fire!" He shook Maggie awake, already rolling out of bed and grabbing his pants. "Get dressed, quick!" Through the window, orange light flickered. The barn was ablaze, flames already licking at the roof. The horses were screaming, their panic carrying on the night air. They ran outside in their night clothes, Elijah heading for the barn while Maggie worked the pump, filling buckets. The heat hit him like a physical force as he threw open the doors. Smoke billowed out, thick and choking. "Moses! Buttercup!" He plunged into the inferno, guided by memory and the sounds of terrified animals. One by one, he led them out. Moses, Buttercup, the 2 younger mares, the yearling colt. His lungs burned, his eyes streamed, but he kept going back until every animal was safe in the yard. By then, neighbors had arrived, drawn by the glow against the night sky. They formed a bucket brigade, but it was too late. The barn was fully engulfed, the old wood burning like kindling. All they could do was keep it from spreading to the house. Dawn found them soot-stained and exhausted, staring at the smoldering ruins. The barn was gone, along with the hay stores, the tacked tools collected over years of work. The house had been saved, but only just. Scorch marks decorated one wall like accusations. Sheriff Morrison arrived as the sun climbed higher, his face grim. This wasn't an accident. No, Elijah agreed tiredly. It wasn't. Found tracks leading away. 4 horses heading back toward town. Morrison spat into the ashes. "You know who did this. Knowing and proving are different things. Maybe, maybe not." The sheriff studied him. "What are you planning to do about it?" Elijah looked at Maggie, huddled in a borrowed coat, her face smudged with soot, but determined. She met his gaze steadily, and he saw his own thoughts reflected there. "What needs to be done?" he said simply. Morrison sighed. "Don't do anything stupid. Elijah, the law let him walk away after threatening my wife. The law says her money belongs to him just because his brother married her. The law isn't always enough, Tom. Maybe not, but it's what separates us from animals." After Morrison left, Elijah found Maggie in what was left of the barn, poking through the ashes with a stick. She'd found a few metal items, horseshoes, the iron parts of bridles, things that survived the flames. "We can rebuild," she said without preamble. "The money will cover it. Better than before, even. Maggie, no. She turned to face him, fierce despite her exhaustion. He doesn't get to win, not by burning us out, not by making us afraid. We rebuild, and we go on, and we show him that we're stronger than his hate. And if he comes back, if next time it's not the barn, her jaw set stubbornly, then we face that too, together. He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of smoke and determination that clung to her. All right, we rebuild. But even as he held her, Elijah knew this wasn't over. The fire was just the beginning. Thornberry had shown his hand, proved he was willing to go beyond threats. The next move would be Elijah's, and when it came, it would be final. The town meeting was held in the church on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the fire. Word had spread that Elijah would be there to address what everyone was calling the Thornberry situation, and the pews were packed. Farmers left their fields early. Shopkeepers closed up, and even the saloon girls came to listen. Elijah stood at the front, Maggie beside him, facing their neighbors with steady resolve. Some faces showed support. The Millers, who'd lost their own barn to lightning 2 summers back. Old Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry and knew about surviving where you weren't wanted. Others looked skeptical or openly hostile. Reverend Matthias cleared his throat nervously. Brother Rollins has asked to address the congregation about recent troubles. Elijah stepped forward. Most of you know me. I've lived here 8 years, helped raise barns, shared harvests, stood beside you when times were hard. I'm not a man who asks for much or causes trouble. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, but troubles found me anyway, in the form of August Thornberry. His voice hardened. A man who thinks money gives him the right to terrorize a widow, who burned my barn because I wouldn't let him drag my wife back to Denver like property. That's a serious accusation, called out Walter Hutchins from the back. You got proof it was him? 4 riders left tracks leading back toward town. Thornberry threatened us with 4 men 3 days before. You need me to draw you a picture, Walter? Some folks chuckled, but Hutchins persisted. Still ain't proof. Could have been anyone. Could have been. Elijah agreed, but we all know it wasn't. Judge Harper stood, his presence commanding attention. What exactly are you asking of us, Mr. Rollins? I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling you what's coming. Elijah's gaze swept the room. Thornberry won't stop. Men like him never do. He'll come back. And when he does, I'll defend what's mine. I want you all to know that beforehand, so there's no confusion about why I did what I had to do. The church erupted in voices, some supporting, some protesting. Sheriff Morrison stood, raising his hand for silence. Elijah, you can't just announce you're planning to kill a man. I'm not planning anything. Tom, I'm stating facts. If Thornberry comes to my land with violent intent, I'll meet violence with violence. That's the law of survival out here, and every one of you knows it. Margaret stepped forward then, and the church fell silent. She rarely spoke in public, and her cultured voice carried a weight that Elijah's rougher tones didn't. My husband isn't the one you should fear, she said quietly. August Thornberry he's the kind of man who burns barns in the night, who hires thugs to do his dirty work, who sees other people as possessions to be claimed. Her voice strengthened. I lived 7 years with his brother. I know what these men are capable of. If you want someone to blame for bringing trouble to your town, blame me, but don't blame Elijah for protecting his wife. Mrs. Adelaide Pearson, the banker's wife and unofficial leader of the town's moral contingent, stood. Mrs. Rollins, while we sympathize with your past difficulties, surely there must be a peaceful solution. Perhaps if you return the money is mine. Maggie's interruption was sharp. My dowry, my inheritance, taken by force and held by a man who saw me as less than his horses. Would you return money stolen from you, Mrs. Pearson? Would you negotiate with the thief who took it? Adelaide flushed but held her ground. That's different. How? Maggie challenged. Because I was married to him? Because the law said he owned me? Laws written by men, for men, with no thought to justice. The law is what keeps us civilized, Reverend Matthias interjected weakly. "The law allowed my husband to beat me," Maggie replied, her voice carrying clearly. "The law said I couldn't leave. The law would have me return to Denver to be claimed by another brutal man. So forgive me, Reverend, if I don't share your faith in civilization." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Voices raised in argument. Through it all, Elijah noticed who stood where, which neighbors met his eyes with understanding, which looked away in disapproval. When they finally left, the divisions were clear. Outside, Mayor Whitman caught up with them. "That was brave, what you both did, but bravery might not be enough." Meaning Thornberry's been spreading money around town, hiring men, buying influence. That fire was just the beginning. Elijah studied the mayor's worried face. "You know something specific? Maybe word is he's bringing in a professional, someone from Denver who specializes in resolving disputes." A hired killer. Elijah felt Maggie tense beside him. "When?" "Soon, maybe this week." Whitman glanced around nervously. "I shouldn't even be telling you this, but you've been good to this town. You deserve a warning." After Whitman hurried away, they walked home in silence. The night was clear. Stars scattered like spilled salt across the black sky. Their footsteps crunched on the frozen road, the only sound for miles. "We could leave," Maggie said finally. "Tonight. Take the horses and whatever we can carry." "No, Elijah." "No." He stopped, turned to face her. "We're not running. Not from him, not from anyone. This is our home, our land. We stand and fight. Even if it means dying? Even then, because if we run now, we'll run forever. There'll always be another Thornberry, another town, another reason to pack up and leave." He cupped her face in his hands. "I'm tired of you being afraid. I'm tired of looking over our shoulders. It ends here, one way or another." She searched his face in the moonlight. "You mean to call him out? Face him in the street like some dime novel gunfighter? If that's what it takes, that's not who you are. Maybe it's who I need to be." They resumed walking, but Maggie tucked herself against his side, as if trying to memorize the solid warmth of him. "I wish," she began, then stopped. "What?" "I wish we'd had more time. To be normal, to be happy without the shadow of all this. We'll have time," he promised. But they both heard the uncertainty in his voice. 3 days later, a stranger rode into town. Elijah heard about it from Sam Miller, who'd been in town buying feed. Tall fellow, dressed all in black, has the look of a shootist, tied down guns, cold eyes. Took a room at the hotel but spends his time in the saloon. "He say what his business is?" "Didn't have to. Word is Thornberry hired him out of Denver. Goes by the name of Jacob Cross." Sam lowered his voice. "They say he's killed 12 men in fair fights. Never been beaten." That night, Elijah cleaned his guns with methodical care while Maggie pretended to read. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly. "Dangerous habit." She didn't smile at the weak joke. "What if I went to town tomorrow, talked to Thornberry, offered a compromise?" His hand stilled on the rifle. "What kind of compromise?" "Half the money. I keep half. He gets half. It's more than fair. He has no real claim to any of it." "He wouldn't take it. This isn't about money anymore. If it ever was, it's about pride, about putting you in what he thinks is your place." Elijah resumed cleaning with sharp, angry movements. Men like him can't stand being defied, especially by a woman. "Then what do? We wait. Let him make the first move. When Cross comes, I'll be ready. You can't outdraw a professional killer. Elijah, you're a rancher, not a gunfighter. I'm a man defending his home. Sometimes that's enough." But was it? The question haunted him through the sleepless night. The confrontation came the next morning, as Elijah had known it would. He was fixing the corral gate when he saw them coming. Thornberry and 3 men, including the one who must be Cross, even from a distance. Elijah could see what Sam had meant. The man moved differently than the others, with an economy of motion that spoke of absolute confidence. Maggie appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of hooves. "Elijah!" Stay inside. He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the approaching riders. No matter what happens, stay inside. I won't hide while you— Please! The word came out rough, desperate. For me, please! He heard her sob, but she went inside. The door closed with a sound like finality. Elijah walked to the center of the yard, hands loose at his sides. The morning sun was behind him. A small advantage, but he'd take what he could get. Thornberry stopped his horse 20 feet away, his hired men spreading out in a semicircle. Cross dismounted with fluid grace, positioning himself at an angle that gave him a clear line of fire. Rollins? Thornberry's voice carried smug satisfaction. I believe you know why we're here. I know you're trespassing. Again. I've come to collect what's mine, my sister-in-law and my brother's money. You can hand them over peacefully. Or— He gestured to Cross. She's not going anywhere with you. That's unfortunate, Mr. Cross? The gunfighter stepped forward, coat pushed back to reveal the pearl-handled Colts at his hips. Up close, his face was weathered but calm, like a man discussing the weather. Mr. Rollins, Cross said in a voice smooth as aged whiskey. I've got no quarrel with you personal. This is business. You can walk away. Start over somewhere else. Man like you can always build another ranch. Can't build another wife? Elijah replied steadily. Something flickered in Cross's eyes. Respect, maybe, or pity. No, reckon not. How you want to do this? That's up to you, but know this. You pull those guns. Only one of us walks away. And if it's you, you'll have to go through her to get what Thornberry wants. Ask yourself if his money's worth killing a woman. Cross glanced at Thornberry, then back to Elijah. Fair fight? Your draw against mine? If that's how it has to be. Elijah, no! The cry came from the house. Maggie stood on the porch, Elijah's spare rifle in her hands, aimed at Thornberry. You move, any of you, and Thornberry dies first, she said, voice steady despite the tears on her face. I've got nothing left to lose. The moment stretched taut. Thornberry had gone pale, finally understanding he wasn't dealing with a frightened, beaten woman anymore. Cross surprised everyone by chuckling. Well now, this is interesting. He raised his hand slowly, showing empty palms. Ma'am, I don't kill women. Never have, never will. And seems to me any woman willing to face down 4 armed men for her husband is one worth respecting. Cross, Thornberry sputtered. I'm paying you to face her husband, not her. And I'm thinking maybe this isn't the kind of business I want to be in anymore. Cross looked at Elijah with something like approval. You've got yourself a warrior there. Rollins, man's lucky to find a woman like that once in a lifetime. I know it, Elijah said simply. Cross turned back to Thornberry. I'm done here. Keep your money. Find another gun to do your dirty work. You can't just— Watch me. Cross mounted his horse with the same fluid grace, touched his hat to Maggie. Ma'am, Rollins, good luck to you both. He rode away without looking back, leaving Thornberry sputtering with rage and his 2 remaining men shifting nervously. You! Thornberry pointed at Maggie, spittle flying. You've ruined everything, just like you ruined my brother. Your brother ruined himself, Maggie replied, rifle never wavering. With his cruelty and his pride, just like you're doing now. I'll be back, Thornberry promised, voice shaking with fury. With more men, better men, I'll burn this whole place to the ground. I'll see you both. The rifle shot cut him off, the bullet kicking up dust an inch from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing him. That's the only warning you get, Maggie said calmly, already levering another round. The next one goes in you, now get off our land. They fled then, Thornberry clinging to his spooked horse, his men following with relief written on their faces. Elijah watched until they disappeared over the rise, then turned to his wife. She stood on the porch still, rifle drooping in her hands, shaking like a leaf in a storm. He reached her just as her knees gave out, catching her and the rifle both. I couldn't let him, she sobbed against his chest. Couldn't let him take you from me. Not you too. Shh. He held her tight, his own hands not quite steady. It's over. You saved us both. He'll be back. He said, "Let me worry about Thornberry." But even as he said it, Elijah knew she was right. Thornberry wouldn't let this stand. Pride wouldn't let him. He'd come back, and next time they'd be ready. That night, as they lay entwined in bed, Maggie traced the scar on his shoulder from a long-ago braking accident. "I would have shot him," she said quietly. "If Cross had drawn on you, I would have killed Thornberry and probably died for it, but I wouldn't have watched you fall. I know. Does that make me a bad person? That I could kill for love when I couldn't kill for freedom?" He turned to face her in the darkness. "Makes you human, makes you mine, makes me the luckiest man alive." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate, and they made love like it might be the last time, because tomorrow would bring what tomorrow brought. But tonight, they were alive and together and victorious. In the morning, they'd face whatever came next. Together. Always together. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, melting snow into rushing streams and turning the earth soft and ready for planting. The new barn stood proud against the blue sky, built better and stronger than before with the help of neighbors who'd rallied around the Rollins family. It was a testament to community, to resilience, to the choice of love over fear. Maggie knelt in the garden, her hands deep in the dark soil, planting seeds that would grow into sustenance for the months ahead. The simple blue dress she wore was dirt-stained at the knees, and there was a smudge of earth across her cheek where she'd pushed back a strand of hair. To Elijah, watching from the porch, she'd never looked more beautiful. "Letter came," he called out, holding up the envelope that had arrived with the morning mail run. She looked up, shading her eyes against the sun. "From whom?" "Denver. Looks official." Her hands stilled on the seed packet. They'd heard nothing from Thornberry since that morning 3 months ago when she'd driven him off at gunpoint. The silence had been almost worse than threats. A held breath. A storm waiting to break. She stood, dusting off her hands on her apron as she walked to the porch. Together. They read the letter from a law firm in Denver, the formal language taking a moment to penetrate. "He's dead," Maggie whispered, sinking onto the porch step. August is dead. According to the letter, August Thornberry had been killed in a saloon dispute 6 weeks prior, shot by a card sharp he'd accused of cheating. His estate was in chaos, with creditors circling like vultures. The law firm was writing to inform Mrs. Margaret Rollins that all claims against her had been dropped, as there was no one left to pursue them. "It's over," Elijah said, sitting beside her. "Truly over." Maggie laughed, but it came out cracked, almost hysterical. "All that fear, all that running, and he dies in a card game. There's no justice in that. No, meaning, maybe that is justice," Elijah suggested quietly. "He lived by violence and greed. He died the same way. Meanwhile, you're here, alive, free, building something good." She leaned against his shoulder, the letter crumpling in her hands. "I should feel relieved. I do feel relieved. But I also feel empty, like I've been running so long I don't know how to stop." "Then don't stop. Run toward something instead of away." He gestured at the garden, the barn, the land stretching golden in the morning light. "Run toward this life we're building, toward the children we'll raise, toward all the summers and winters we'll weather together." She turned to look at him, and he saw the moment she truly understood. It was over. The last walls in her eyes crumbled, leaving only love and possibility. "Children," she repeated softly, a hand moving to her still flat stomach. About that, Elijah's heart stopped. "Maggie? I wasn't sure. Before, I thought maybe I couldn't, but I've been sick in the mornings, and I haven't bled in 2 months, and—" She smiled through sudden tears. "I think we're going to have that family sooner than we planned." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair to hide his own tears. After all the loss, all the pain, life was asserting itself with stubborn insistence. Where death had walked, new life would grow. "When?" he managed to ask. Late fall. I think October, maybe November. He pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. Are you happy? Terrified, she admitted. But yes, happy. So happy I can barely breathe with it. They sat there on the porch, holding each other in the secret of new life between them, while the spring morning bloomed around them. The letter from Denver lay forgotten at their feet, already irrelevant to the future they were writing together. That evening, they walked down to the creek where, years ago, they'd met in secret to dream of a life together. The willows were budding, green and hopeful, and the water ran clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. I used to write you letters, Maggie said, trailing her fingers through the water. All through those 7 years. Letters I could never send, telling you about my days, asking about yours. I burned them all the night Harrison died. I talked to you, Elijah admitted. Out loud, like a fool, when I was working the ranch alone. I'd tell you about the horses, the weather, the way the sunset looked. Probably scared away half the wildlife with my chattering. She laughed, the sound bright as the water. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Talking to ghosts for 7 years? Not ghosts, just each other, separated by miles and circumstance. He pulled her close. But we found our way back. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we'd run away together that summer? If we'd defied everyone and everything? Sometimes, he said honestly. But then I think maybe we needed those years. Maybe we had to break before we could become strong enough for this. He touched her stomach gently, strong enough to protect what matters. She covered his hand with hers. I want to write it down, all of it, our story, so our children know where they came from, what we survived to give them life. Painful reading, true reading. And truth is what makes us strong. The sun was setting by the time they walked back to the house, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney. Maggie had left stew simmering, and the horses called greeting from the corral. It was a scene of such ordinary beauty, it made Elijah's throat tight. What? Maggie asked, noticing his expression. Just thinking how I used to imagine this, coming home to you, building a life together. Reality is better than anything I dreamed, even with all the pain it took to get here. Especially with that, because we know the value of what we have. We know how easily it can be lost and how hard it must be protected. They were almost to the porch when they heard hoofbeats. Both tensed, old fears dying hard. But it was only young Tommy Chen from town, riding his father's mare with more enthusiasm than skill. Mrs. Rollins! Mr. Rollins! He slid from the saddle, breathless with excitement. Ma sent me to tell you. There's a family at our place, the Kowalskis from Ohio. They're looking for land to buy, to start a farm. Pa thought you might want to meet them, seeing as how the old Baxter place is still for sale next to yours. New neighbors, new lives taking root in the harsh, beautiful land. Maggie and Elijah exchanged glances. Tell your PA we'll come by tomorrow, Elijah said, and tell the Kowalskis we'd be pleased to meet them. Tommy grinned and scrambled back onto the mare, riding off in a cloud of dust and pride at completing his mission. Neighbors, Maggie mused. Maybe with children. Wouldn't that be nice? It would, Elijah agreed, already imagining barn raisings and harvest shares, children playing together while adults worked side by side, community, future, all the things that made survival worthwhile. That night, after supper was done and the house settled into evening quiet, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with paper and ink, beginning the story she'd promised to write. Elijah watched her work, the lamplight catching the silver threads that recent trials had woven through her dark hair. How does it start? He asked. She looked up, smiling. The rancher entered his barn and stopped cold. She read. His first love slept there in moonlit shadows. Good beginning. It's a good story. She replied. Worth telling, right? As she wrote, he built up the fire and checked the locks, habits that would take time to break. Outside, an owl called. And somewhere in the distance, coyotes sang to the rising moon. The world went on. dangerous and beautiful in equal measure. But inside the house, there was warmth and light and love. There was the scratch of pen on paper as Maggie documented their journey. There was the promise of new life growing beneath her heart. There was the solid presence of a man who'd waited 7 years for love to return and would wait 70 more if needed. When Maggie finally set down her pen, hand cramping from the effort, she'd filled 10 pages with their story's beginning. She looked at Elijah, who'd been reading over her shoulder for the last hour. "What do you think?" "I think our children will know they come from strong stock," he said. "I think they'll understand that love isn't always easy or safe, but it's always worth fighting for." She stood, stretching tired muscles. "And the ending? How should it end?" He pulled her into his arms, swaying gently as if to music only they could hear. "It doesn't end," he said. "It just keeps going, season after season, year after year. Children growing, gardens blooming, storms weathering, love deepening. That's the best ending, the one that isn't an ending at all." And they lived. Maggie murmured against his chest. "Not happily ever after, because that's for fairy tales. Just..." "And they lived." "They lived," Elijah agreed. "Despite everything and everyone who tried to stop them, they lived and loved and built something that would last." Outside, spring peepers began their evening chorus, singing of renewal and possibility. Inside, Maggie and Elijah slow danced in their kitchen, her head on his shoulder, his hand protective over where their child grew. They'd walked through fire and shadow to reach this moment, this quiet joy that was somehow worth every scar. In the months that would follow, their child would quicken and grow. The Kowalski family would buy the Baxter place and become good neighbors. The new barn would shelter abundant harvests. There would be challenges: drought one summer, fever another winter, the ordinary trials of life on the frontier. But there would also be laughter and love, and the steady accumulation of days that make a life worth living. Maggie would finish writing their story, and it would be passed down through generations, a reminder that love could conquer pride, that courage could overcome fear, that two broken people could build something whole and beautiful together. But all of that was still to come. For now, there was just this: a man and woman dancing in their kitchen, the spring night soft around their home, and the knowledge that they'd chosen each other above all else. They'd chosen love. They'd chosen life. They'd chosen to stay and fight and build, and in the end, that made all the difference. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Somewhere in those shadows was the memory of a scared woman sleeping in a barn, of a man who'd recognized his heart's desire despite 7 years of separation. But the shadows held no fear now, only history, the foundation on which their future was built. As the night deepened and they climbed the stairs to their bed, Maggie paused at the window. The moon was rising, full and bright, painting the world in silver. "Look," she said softly. "You can see the barn from here." Elijah joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. The new barn stood proud in the moonlight, a symbol of resurrection, of community, of refusal to be broken. "Where it all began," he murmured. "No," she corrected, turning in his arms. "Where it began again. The real beginning was a summer 7 years before. 2 young fools who thought love was enough. Wasn't it?" She smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "No, but love and courage together, love and choice, love and the willingness to fight for it. That was enough. That was everything." They stood there a moment longer, looking out at their land, their life, their hard-won peace. Then they went to bed, to sleep and dream and wake to another day of building the future they'd almost lost. And in the barn below, moonlight slanted through the windows, falling on fresh hay and solid beams, on a place of shelter and safety where once there had been only shadows and fear. It was a good barn, built to last, built with hope, just like the love it had sheltered, once upon a winter's night. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We hope the journey of Elijah and Maggie touched your heart as much as it touched ours. Where are you tuning in from today? We'd love to hear from listeners around the world. Please subscribe to our channel From Wild West and share your thoughts about this tale of love conquering all odds. Did you connect with Maggie's courage? Were you rooting for Elijah through it all? Drop a comment below and let's discuss this powerful story of second chances and enduring love in the American frontier. Until next time, partners.